up your engine! If you want to learn how to work on your car and do it right, there's a few things that are really a necessity to have. They don't cost that much money, and I'm going to show you what you need and how to use them so you can fix your own car, not spending a fortune, not wasting your money on either super expensive repairs or super expensive tools that you're hardly ever going to use. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk about is this AT205 reseal. It is a clear polymer. It looks like water. As you can see when I pour it in this dirty glass, it really looks just like water, but it isn't. It's a liquid polymer formulation. And what it does is it can stop leaks in rubber seals. The polymers rejuvenate the rubber. Now, I've been using this stuff for over 3 decades. Especially stuff's going to cost a fortune. Let's say you got a transmission front main seal leak that's leaking on the front of the transmission. Or you have an engine rear main seal leak where the transmission bolts into the engine. The seal on the back of the engine is the rear main seal of the engine, and the seal in the front of the transmission is the front main seal of the transmission. With age, those seals will leak. To replace either one of them, you have to, at a minimum, pull the transmission out of the car. You could pull the engine out, but it's usually easier to take the transmission off than the engine. Either way, it's a gigantic job. Being a polymer, this stuff works in engine oil, but also in transmission fluid. And what it does is it rejuvenates the rubber and it can stop leaking. I have used this hundreds of times. Guys will come with an automatic transmission. It's leaking at the front seal, dripping between the engine and the transmission, and it's dripping transmission fluid. I would put a bottle of this stuff in, pour it in the transmission. You would just pour it in there. To drive it, maybe 200 miles, doesn't matter right away or over time. I put it in a Volvo once. When you poured the transmission fluid in, you could see it dripping out as soon as you poured it in. One time I poured a bottle of this in. While I washed it, within 5 minutes, the drip actually stopped. And the same thing with rear main engine oil seals of the engine. Now with the transmission, if it seals it, great. It's in there, you just leave it alone. But if it's in the engine, then every time you change the engine oil, you'd have to put a bottle in. But I mean, really, if the bottle costs you 14 bucks and you're saving over $1,000, who really cares? Stuff works great, like I said. I've been using it for over 3 decades. And the interesting thing is, being a polymer, it doesn't have any solids in it. There's a lot of sealers out there. You see them, you shake them up, you see all these solids. They can clog up your transmission and clog up your engine. This stuff doesn't clog anything up. So you can use it in any system that uses petroleum-based oils, you know? You can put it in engines, transmissions, rear ends, differentials. Now you can use it in power steering, but realize power steering pumps, they sometimes have 1,500 pounds per square inch pressure. Occasionally, this will actually rejuvenate seals and it can stop leaking. But there's so much more pressure. You got a lot less odds of it working in a 1,500 PSI system than you do in an automatic transmission where maybe it's pumping out 45 PSI versus 1,500. You can't expect miracles all the time. I used to have to search around for this stuff, but now I just go to Amazon, buy them at a case at a time. You can get it one at a time too if you want. I just buy it by the case, it's cheaper. Now let's say your radiator's leaking coolant, maybe a rock hit it, or maybe it's just old age. If unfortunately, let's say your head gasket is leaking. If your head gasket is leaking externally so that you see the coolant coming on the outside of the engine, this bar's leaks can work quite well because in a radiator system, you don't have that much pressure. It might be 12, 14, 16 pounds per square inch. That's not that much pressure. Now, if your head gasket is blowing inside the engine, you don't see it leaking externally, but it's burning it inside. You can try various sealers. Bar actually makes a head gasket sealer. It's worth trying. But then you've got the explosion of the engine, and again, you're dealing with thousands of PSI pressure when the gasoline ignites. And the odds of sealer sealing that much pressure is kind of slim. But since your radiator system itself, if it's leaking outside the engine and it's just the cooling jackets, it's only, like I say, 14, 16 PSI. This stuff can work quite well. I've used it for years. I put them in cars. Sometimes the radiator will last for 3 or 4 years before it starts leaking again. Sometimes they never start leaking again. And the advantage of this is, as you can see on the label here, works with water or antifreeze. And the real important part is this. Used with all types of coolant, including yellow, orange, pink, red, blue, and green silicate-based and non-silicate-based. Oat, hot, antifreeze, and or water. So you can use it in anything. Now, they do give you a logical warning on the bottle, which is totally true. if your cooling system is totally clogged up and filthy and rusty, you gotta flush it out first. You don't just pour this in an absolute clunky system. Since it works with water or coolant, you could flush it all out, just put water in, and then put this stuff in. See if it works. If it doesn't work, maybe you're gonna get rid of the car, maybe you're gonna replace the radiator, but you're not wasting the money of putting new coolant in, putting this in and finding out that you're gonna have to buy an expensive part. Just don't put it in a completely clogged up system. I've had people say, I tried that sealer, clogged up my car. No, if your car was clogged up in the first place, yeah, it can clog it up. And if it's the wrong kind of sealer, let's say it's a sealer made for the old green antifreeze, but you have red antifreeze, that can make the red antifreeze clog up. If you put it in a red antifreeze system when the sealer was only made for the green, and other sealers, they only work with water. It'll say flush everything out, only put water in, and then put this in. This can go with water, coolant, anything. It's permanent. You can leave it in. I've been using this stuff for decades. Basically what happens is you can see the silver parts. It's hot inside. And where it leaks out, it's being put out at a high pressure. And then it leaks out to our atmosphere that has oxygen. Well, this stuff, when it's hot and under pressure and it comes in contact with oxygen, it hardens and seals it up. Like I say, I've put them in some cars 3-4 years later, they're still driving them down the road. I mean, it's really a worthwhile thing to try if you've got something that maybe is an old clunky, you don't want to put much money in it, or let's say you're on a trip or something and a rock hits your radiator. Hey, maybe just buy a bottle of this, throw it in the trunk like I do. I got a can of it in the trunk of all my cars. You never know. I drive old cars, 15, 20, 30 years old. It's a handy thing to have. Now the next handy thing I'm talking about comes in cans. It's called Plexus. It is a plastic cleaner, protectant, and polish. I've been using this thing for decades. I started on motorcycles. I found it at a motorcycle shop. Then the motorcycle shop went out of business. I couldn't find a place to buy it anymore. But of course, that was over a decade ago. Now, thanks to Amazon, you can get it in 2 seconds. I ordered it, came the next day. Stuff is amazing. It was originally invented for planes with those plexiglass domes to polish them and to keep them from being corroded. It has a light polish in it, but it's also got a protectant, and it's anti-static. So it actually keeps dust from being attracted. A lot of that dust is attracted to your car by static electricity. This neutralizes it, and it will actually stay cleaner longer. Now, it's good on any kind of plastic, but the main use, headlights. They're clear. You want them clean, but you don't want to scratch them up. And do as the directions say. Do not use paper towels. Use a nice microfiber towel. You don't want to scratch anything. You just spray it on and wipe it off. That's it. Now check it out. These are 5-year-old headlights. Look how they still shine. Now I originally bought this matrix for my wife from a guy from Arizona. So it was in the Arizona sun. And the only thing that's really bad about Toyota and Lexus is a lot of their plastic headlight assemblies aren't that well made for ultraviolet protection, and they fade. So the original headlights faded. As you can tell, these aren't the stock factory ones. I got the darker ones that look cooler. I put these on 5 years ago, but 3 or 4 times a year, I spray them and polish them with this Plexus. They still look brand new. The ultraviolet protectant on this thing keeps them from fading away. Now they claim that this not only cleans and polishes, but that it actually seals the micropores in the plastic to keep them from both fading and then eventually cracking. Well, who knows about that actual claim on the bottle, but 5 years later, they're still shining like new. And these weren't expensive headlight assemblies. These babies came from Taiwan. I got them on Amazon. They were $49 a piece. The cheapest ones I could find. Compared to the new ones I just put on my wife's Lexus. These were $249 a piece. And I had to replace them because on this, I had bought a cheaper replacement years ago, and they faded away like mad. They were painted with some kind of special paint. And the paint all chipped off and they looked like crap. I kept polishing and polishing. Finally I gave up and bought these really expensive ones, which I now coat with Plexus, so I don't have to worry about. Now that in itself is very good advice. If I would have known the idiots in China that sold me the original replacement ones had painted them with a clear lacquer, I wouldn't have bought them. Because that's what happens to clear lacquer on headlights. It eventually cracks off. So if you watch any of these idiots on YouTube that put out videos that say, look, we get it all polished, we sand it down, polish it, and then we spray paint it with the lacquer paint so it seals it in. That stuff is going to crack, fall off, look like crap after a year or two. I even asked my paint and body guy. I said, man, do you clean these up and repaint them? He says, we never paint them. It doesn't last. We will just replace them. If they want them polished, we'll polish them, but we'll tell them. We polished it. Well, it's an old plastic. It was polished. It's going to fade even faster now because it's thinner. These guys that say, oh, we'll spray paint them with clear lacquer. Unless you're selling the car right away, don't do it. Because the ones that I bought that were painted here, maybe a year and a half, the paint lacquer started to crack. Hey, this is on the top of the car. Sun hits it all the time, the heat of the engine. You want to protect it. That's why you want to get the plexus once you buy it and protect it. It is a slight polish. If you have dirty ones, you can clean them up with it and get them as good as you possibly can. But the main thing on this plexus is it's a preventative. Do it 2-3 times a year. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.